Welcome back to the One Soccer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Rae. Today, we're joined by Thomas Sowinski, President and Chief Executive Officer of United Soccer Camps. Thomas brings a rare combination of national governance experience, grassroots leadership, and executive-level digital transformation expertise. He has served as President of State Association Youth Commissioner for U.S. Soccer, Board Secretary for U.S. Youth Soccer, and now is building a development platform focused on measurable player progression. This conversation matters because we're going beyond surface level debates about pay to play and asking a deeper question. How is youth soccer in America structurally designed? Who does it serve? And what would it take to realign incentives towards true player development? Thomas, thank you for taking the time. How are you doing?
Kareem, thank you for having me on here. It's a pleasure to be on the One Soccer Nation podcast. It's a great topic of conversation and a wonderful opportunity to share about what we're doing with United Soccer Camps.
Before we get into governance and structural reform, I want to start at the beginning. How did you first get involved in the beautiful game? And what about those early experiences shaped the way you think about player development today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that, and I remember the very first time I went to go to a soccer registration. I was probably in third or fourth grade, and my father was an American football guy, and he didn't want us playing football because the physical aspect of it. He was probably ahead of his time in terms of the head injuries with players. But I remember going and signing up, and I saw a bunch of kids running around in a circle, and I said, "Wait, this is soccer?" I'd never seen the sport before, and so I started off. When I was a kid, we played 11v11 from the start in a full size pitch. You had young kids chasing after a ball, just being all bunched up like a bunch of bees. And, I was that kid that was able to kick it away and be faster and run down the field and score on a very big goal with a very tiny player. So it's come a long way. We used to use traffic cones for the cones in our training sessions. We didn't have bibs or pennies to wear. We would do shirts and skins in training sessions when we were scrimmaging each other. And so it's definitely come a long way from when I started. Today, kids have much more access and awareness to what the sport is, whether they're watching it on TV or they're playing, FIFA as a video game. Kids are very much more in tuned into the sport. We also have a lot of better systems built over time. Back in the 80s when I started playing, there really was not much. And now when you take a look at kids that come in, it's all, some of these clubs, it's almost like a mini professional atmosphere with, the big kit that they get with their multiple uniforms, team kits, the warm up pants, the professional environment. All these kids play on, synthetic surfaces now. I remember playing on dirt fields sometimes. Sometimes the pitching mound from a baseball field was still on the field when we would play. So it has definitely come a long way, and I think it has come for the better.
Absolutely. Time flies when you're having fun. I think, 46 years later, where soccer is now is pretty exciting with, just last year we had the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup, this year the 2026 World Cup, 2028 the Olympics in LA, so more soccer being played, and then potentially 2031 a Women's World Cup in the US. It's looking pretty exciting. And what really just like brought me back in time too is like the car cones that you'd mentioned. I just got a flashback on that. I completely forgot about those, but no, completely different time. When you look now at players playing and growing up in the time that they're living in, how big is the difference, and how lucky are these players growing up now in your eyes?
Oh, I would say they are, blessed is probably a term that I would say in terms of, the opportunities that they have to play, whether it's playing rec at your town level when you first start off to being able to play in a club, play high school, opportunities to play in college and beyond. I think, these players really have a much higher leg up in terms of, their soccer careers. And I think, some of the things that, when you take a look at the differences, we're focusing more on small sided games. Kids at younger ages, they play on a smaller field. They have less number of players in there to increase the number of touches on a ball. The goals are smaller to make it easier for goalies to save balls and more of a challenge for kids to score. And so I honestly think that, when you factor in professional coaches, most of my coaches when I was a kid growing up, they were, moms and dads that, probably came from other sports. Very rarely did I have a true soccer coach that played soccer and understood the game. And so it was a great opportunity for me to grow up and fall in love with this. But I think kids nowadays just have a much better leg up.
Yeah, 100%. And the the infrastructure is continuing to grow. So it's exciting to see that in all aspects and at all different levels. Um, at what point did you realize the system was not aligned with the type of development you believed in?
It's hard to pinpoint a specific point in time. I would say it's probably more of an evolution as my understanding of the game continued to grow. I had a very US centered understanding. As I started to become friends with, especially some of the foreign coaches that came over and spent some time over in England and Spain, my kids have played, they've had the opportunity to play over there. Met some wonderful people. There's a couple to just call out. Todd Bean, who runs Tobo in Spain. It's a phenomenal academy. He does a wonderful job with it. He does camps over here in the U.S. in the summer. He really helped open my eyes in terms of that training and development aspect of the player. And then likewise, a good friend of mine, Tosh Farrell, he's former Everton Academy director, developed Wayne Rooney when he was a youth in the Everton system. He was a coach over here, and he coached my son Tommy the last couple of years that Tosh was here in the U.S. I used to go to Tommy's training sessions with my notebook, and as much as Tommy was learning how to play, I was sitting there learning how to coach because from a youth development perspective, I think Tosh is probably one of the best out there. And so as I saw the world game, and I started to understand, like, why is it that a country our size, with our population and the money that we put into sports here in the U.S., why is our men's team only 17th ranked going into this Olympic or World Cup? We've got countries that are smaller than ours, size of some of our states, less funding, less population. How are they ranked higher than us? And so it really starts to highlight, what are we doing different with all of the resources and the money we have that is not leading to quality results on the field? And so when I looked at other countries and started understanding their systems, it was really their emphasis on player development and the player that stuck out to me. We have a very big winning culture here in the U.S. We want to win. And so at U8, we want to go win. At U10, we want to win. And I think a lot of times, that sacrifices the development aspect because a winning team does not necessarily equal development. It can. You can develop players and go win games, but it takes time to develop the player. But you can go and win with good athletes at younger age groups, but it doesn't mean you're developing.
Yeah, 100%. Winning is like the cherry on top. With saying that, with your coaching experience and opening up the door to international and traveling international and then seeing different things, connecting with different people, what made you take the next step to say, hey, I want to do more than just coaching? I want to create my own programs, own systems, dive into entrepreneurship. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. So what made you take the next step and why?
I think it was the fact that I'm not seeing it done here in the U.S. the way I think it could be, and that may be an altruistic vision that I'm trying to achieve here. But from my perspective, if we focus on the player development and we develop the player, that's going to lead to better results. Especially when kids are younger, you build those foundational core skills. It will translate later on in life. And as they develop as a player, and we start looking at a player development as more as a progression over their adolescent lives and to becoming young adults, that player development is going to lead to better results. We don't necessarily need results at U8, U10. The results at that age should be, how is the player progressing in terms of development on their individual skills, their 1v1 skills, 3v3 situations. That is where I would say it's the most important for development is those age groups. And so with the current structure and that we have, I realize that if it's going to be done and change is going to be made, it's going to have to start from the grassroots level. And that's where we chose to start and focus.
Understood. Thomas, switching gears here, you've operated inside U.S. soccer governance at both the state and national levels. When you map the youth soccer ecosystem structurally, including federations, state associations, clubs, leagues, and parents, where exactly does incentives misalign originate from?
Well, I think, when you take a look at all of those organizations, there's just a wonderful group of volunteers at all levels, right? Whether it's your local town or club, even all the way up to a lot of the national boards, they're volunteers that give their time to try and make and improve this game. And so I want to acknowledge, the selflessness of those volunteers, because they put a lot of time and effort in I can relate to that. I did the same thing, and so I know the time and effort that they're giving to this sport, and it really is selfless. And so I wanted to give thanks to all of those people. In terms of misalignment, I think it's kind of across the board. We as I mentioned before, we have such a big winning culture in the country. We try to focus on building the best winning teams we can to play in the best leagues we can. And that's really largely because of the pay to play issue we have here in the United States. Because we are a winning culture, the way you attract parents and players to your club is through winning and through playing in the best league so that your player can get the best opportunity. In that pay to play system, the parent is the customer. And the parents are trying to put their kids into a position that hopefully someday might lead to a college scholarship. I mean, these parents are spending tens of thousands of dollars over the course of a player's career as a youth, hoping that there will be a reward at the end of maybe being that 5 to 6% that goes on to play organized soccer after high school. It's a very small percentage that will get a college offer, and depending upon the level you get into, there's only a fixed number of athletic scholarships available, and so it's a fear of missing out, I think, a little bit from the parent side in terms of I need to constantly be putting my kids into more and more things so that they can have the opportunity to be seen, traveling to all these tournaments so that we can be seen by college coaches, and then there's the dream that of that 5 to 6% that continue to play, it's a smaller percentage that end up going professional. And so many kids grow up, I want to be a professional soccer player, but the mathematics of that suggests it's highly unlikely that's going to happen. I've always told my sons it's education first, because if you never make it as a professional soccer player, you need something to fall back on. Like, you need to have a way to provide for your family and earn an income. And so it can't just be all focused on soccer. But the other thing too is it's a confusing structure, right? Even now, being in the system, it's hard to navigate and know where to put your kid. What are the best opportunities for them to be recognized, to develop, to be seen, and because it's a big focus on the winning side of things, coaching the tactics, how do we win games? I think that player development side falls to the side, and so it's really holistic in terms of what we need to do, where the issues and challenges are, and what we need to do to fix it.
Yeah, 100%. Many great points. I mean, I'm just getting flashbacks right now. You growing up playing soccer competitively here in Ontario, specifically for Woodbridge Strikers. I grew up with a single mom, and as you mentioned, parents are dropping thousands of dollars each year for their kids to be in these programs, to participate and go to tournaments and travel. So it's a lot of driving. Depending on how many tournaments you go to, the costs go up, or expenses per se on the parent for their child to participate. And with saying that, at least for me, luckily, specifically at Woodbridge, I grew up with some great uh, teammates, and their parents were great to support us at times. And I was able to go to these tournaments and participate and get that exposure and that opportunity and those eyeballs. And that leads to other opportunities. As you mentioned, you can't just depend on soccer. I mean, you always hear people say, "Oh, the 1% make it and go pro," but it's really not 1%. If you actually look at the numbers, it's like 0.0001, right? Don't
It's
quote me
very
on that
tough.
number, but
It's a fraction of a percent. You're absolutely correct.
yeah, and everyone wants to go pro, but there's not that many teams, that many positions, right? So that is so important. Education is so important, and um, I think the other thing to highlight too is the players that are not getting these opportunities due to financial. There's so many players that are not getting the opportunity. I mean, so everyone always mentions the play to play model is a blockage. How do we change that structure, or is it even possible to change at this point?
I think it is possible to change, but it'll be hard. Because it requires coming from the top down. Right now, everything comes from the bottom up because the parents are paying. And so you're absolutely right. When you just mentioned about, like the player that can't afford it, how many players get overlooked because they just don't have the economic ability to to play and compete. Let's be honest, the higher you go in the sport, the more competitive it becomes, and the more money parents need to spend to get their players to be recognized and understood, and seen by coaches. So the pay-to-play model is in place, and it's not. And when people say like the pay-to-play model needs to go away, it's not saying like coaches and clubs don't get paid, right? A lot of people think that that's the case. It just means we need to try to change the structure. And to me, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. If you change it to come from the top, then the incentivizations will change. Because right now, we have great coaches in this country, but the coaches are incentivized to win matches, win leagues, win tournaments. Clubs want to put their best teams in the top leagues in the country, right? You're thinking MLS next, ECNL. ECNL is both boys and girls, the GA on the girls side. Like, clubs are trying to get into those leagues to attract parents because they want that opportunity for their player and they don't want to miss out at it. And so it's very expensive for parents to pay for all of this. So those kids that don't have the financial means, like, yes, there's scholarships and there's means tested stuff that some clubs do, but it's not holistic. It needs to be much more of a merit-based system where, maybe parents pay a little bit, but the kid moves up based off of their ability. And if we change the economics from the parents paying to the top clubs paying, now the clubs are looking at players. They want to find players that are going to fit their systems, make them be a better team. They're not looking at teams that win. And so if the person who is now the consumer, it goes away from the parent, and the club at the top is the consumer, and they're looking at players, you're going to incentivize coaches to develop players. And then the coaches that are recognized as good development coaches, they're going based off of merit. They're going to have a much larger earning potential because they'll have opportunities to move up to higher level clubs. And so changing the model to be one from, the parent being the customer and having the winning culture of trying to win, to the clubs being the customer and trying to find the best developed players, that to me aligns more with what a lot of other countries in the world do. And that's why smaller countries are able to have better teams. I mean, I talked about our men's team before, but when you look at the women's team, the women's games improved significantly over the last few decades. And, our women went from absolutely dominating everything to struggling now. And I think that's because other countries have better aligned their women's programs to the programs they had built for the men, and they focus on that development.
Understood. Diving deeper into incentive of economics, if we modeled the revenue flow of a typical competitive club, where does player development rank relative to retention and winning?
Third. And I say that reluctantly because it should be first. But at the end of the day, if you're not winning games and you're not playing in the highest leagues, parents are going to look for the clubs that do. So if you were a club that went out there and said, hey, we're focused on the long-term development of your players, I think those types of clubs would really struggle because they're not out there winning games every weekend. Right? They're not out there, worrying about, are my parents going to come back next year? Right? How many people can I get on contracts for the next season before I have to open up tryouts? And these are all the economic realities of running a club. And so when you take a look at, the fiscal responsibility to run a club appropriately and be able to provide, they have to focus on the parents and how many parents and players can we get in. And right now that development is not the top priority to do so.
Got it. I mean, it will definitely take a lot of time for change. And we spoke about this offline too, in regards to, change starts with individuals like yourself that are implementing change, that are building. There are other people like yourself doing it. But we just need a lot more to continue to grow on that side. Would a club that truly prioritizes long-term development likely sacrifice short-term revenue stability?
Absolutely. In the current economic model of youth sports, they would, because I think part of it is an education on the parents, right? And educating parents that it's not about the winning results at a younger age. It's more about the development of the individual, but it's being able to show and demonstrate to the parents, like, how is this player developing? Uh, it, there should be some sort of a metric that says, when a kid's U8, here's the basic skills they should be developing, and we should be having that conversation with the player and the parent around, here's what you're doing well, here's where you need to improve, because at U10 you expand upon that and so on through the rest of the age groups. But when you look at most club structures, you've got one coach for 15 to 20 kids. When you look at a typical structure where you get 2 to 3 training sessions a week for, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, in that small time frame, how are you able to give meaningful feedback to individual players on what they need to do when the focus is on what is the team doing and the tactics the team is doing, so we can go and improve and win games? Um, it's very challenging to do as coaches, especially when, a lot of coaches, their evenings are filled with coaching 2 to 3 teams. And so you're going from one training session to the next to the next. How do you spend that time before or after a training session giving the meaningful feedback a player needs to understand what they need to do to develop? And this happens, from small clubs up to your larger clubs at all levels. I've seen it. And I think it's a challenge for the coaches. And if you look at, especially over, you look at like Europe or something, go watch and I know Barcelona is going to be it's kind of out there because they're such a big club, but go look at the number of coaches they have on a training session for their players. They got like 4 or 5. And so those coaches are constantly talking, giving improvement, giving players feedback. Bigger clubs, that they might give you one high level review, in the fall season, in the spring season. I think that's good and helpful. But a lot of times the players need, corrective action, within the season, and having those meaningful conversations are helpful. I'll give you an example. I can't tell you how many players, I coach a high school team. I can't tell you how many players still can't use their left foot. Right. And these are, I coached a boys team. These are, 15, 16, 17-year-old boys that, through their entire development, not a single coach worked with them to develop their weak foot. And I think that's just a fact that because we focus so much on the winning aspect, if we got good athletes and I can have a big, strong kid in the back boot the ball and a fast kid can run and get it and score, hey, we won, we did our job, excellent. But we're not, how does a person not, by the time they're 10 years old, not know how to be using their weak foot? May not be as good as their strong foot, but something as simple like that, we overlook in the U.S. And it's not just, that's one anecdote, but I go and I watch my kids play. I watch even kids at the highest level are terrible with their weak foot. I think that right there is just, big asterisk on how we're not focusing on the individual player development. We're more worried about how our teams are doing.
Yeah, no, definitely the transition of focusing on, as you've said many times, on winning and transferring that over to focusing on development. Um, that's the big key takeaway. I mean, and it's true. I've experienced it myself, growing up playing in the US and playing in Canada. It is, again, it's important for the player development to improve so that athlete has the best opportunity to be the best player on field. But again, it will definitely take time. It will definitely take time.
It certainly will.
Switching gears, in many European systems, coach compensation is indirectly tied to player advancement through training compensation and solidarity structures. In the United States, compensation is parent funded and results driven. If you were designing a coach compensation framework aligned to player progression rather than trophies, what would that look like operationally?
Well, solidarity payments from FIFA, those get initiated on international transfers. So if a player in the US signs a professional contract in the UK, the solidarity payment gets triggered, and there's a set number aside by FIFA. So that from that perspective, with the few number of players we have going, across season signing in professional leagues in Europe or elsewhere, there's few solidarity payment. But there's countries that outside of the FIFA rules that have enacted their own payments within their countries for domestic contracts. So when a player signs a domestic contract, let's say New England Revolution or my team in the MLS. So let's say a player in the US signs with the Revs. There should be a compensation, like a training compensation that's triggered for all of the clubs that spent time developing that player throughout their youth career. Right now, MLS clubs are able to get the solidarity payments from FIFA, but there's nothing else coming down. I had a conversation one time with the youth club director, and I was asking him, there's a town next to where I was living at the time, and I said, there's a lot of great players in this town, but these poor kids don't have two nickels to rub together. What can you do? And one of the things, like when you say, like, like I mentioned, was an evolution over time. This conversation was part of it. And he said, he's an English guy, so he calls me Tommy. He said, Tommy, he's like, I'd love to do it, but I'm already scholarshiping $250,000 a year to players. And, as a businessman, I can't do any more. He's like, because all it takes is for me to develop a player for a few years, and then New England Revolution will come in and say, hey, thanks for developing the player, pat me on the back, and take him away. And I don't get any compensation for the time and the money that, we've invested as a club to train and develop the player, but also the time that we've spent, scholarshiping the player. And so that was kind of one of those light bulb moments where I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you should be compensated for your development of the player, but it doesn't happen. And so that would be one thing that I would change, is that to help change the model, how do we, when a player here in the US signs a contract, whether it's, with an MLS club, an NWSL club, or if it's with, like a lower division club, as long as it's a professional contract, there should be some sort of compensation going back to all the clubs that spent time developing the player. That's the one thing that I would probably change. There was another thing, how do we make the pathway a little bit clearer? If you look at some U.S. youth soccer and U.S. club soccer are the two largest, youth registration platforms or groups in the country. They've just worked out a partnership between the National League and the National Academy League coming together and playing and combining to make it a little bit clearer for parents. And I think that's a positive thing. Again, it's looking at the league structure and, all the competing leagues and various leagues that we have at the youth level. And people have oftentimes, referred to it as the alphabet soup, but, I think that's a positive thing, is for them to work and partner together in terms of, the league aspect. But again, it's leagues, not necessarily player development. So I think there's some positive things that are happening. But I would definitely make that change, that, compensation for training comes from the top down.
Would leagues need to mandate that structure for it to scale nationally, or is it at a United States Soccer Federation level?
I would say that's something that has to come from the federation, right? Because if a league said, hey, it would be very difficult for, a youth league in the country, right? I'm going to pick ECNL because it operates outside of, the MLS and whatnot, and NWSL. But if ECNL said, hey, MLS, you have to give us solidarity payments, nothing says that MLS can say no, right? And so, the money usually comes from the professional teams. You look across, the country, that's where the money is made. And so when they sign a contract, money is set aside to go to those lower level clubs. And so I don't think it's necessarily a league thing that the leagues can impose, because they just, the league doesn't have, like, the youth leagues don't have the money to give back. It has to come from the professional clubs when they sign a player to a professional contract. A portion of that contract should be going back to the youth clubs, at all levels that spend time developing that.
Got it. What specifically compelled you to start United Soccer Camps, and what gap in the market were you uniquely positioned to solve?
Well, I think that, when I was at the national level, like working within U.S. youth and U.S. soccer, I realized that trying to make change at that level was going to be hard. It really was going to be difficult. Now, I think it's very good that, like Matt Crocker, the last few months, he's been coming out and talking about the challenges of the pay to play model, and, how that needs to change and what we do it. And I recently wrote an article around, many of the points we're talking about changing that structure to be more from the top down, to change the incentivization of coaches. But recognizing that fact that it would be very difficult to change from the top, I said, why don't we change it from the bottom? How do we get in and start changing, how we develop players and prove the model? I've said before, maybe it's an altruistic mission that I'm on, but if we can prove the model that we can develop better players starting at the grassroots, that might be something that can take hold that uh, can drive that development forward. And we're looking at you know doing something that's cost effective, because I don't want to just limit it to kids that have money, but how do we make it a way that it's open for everybody and it doesn't disrupt the current ecosystem. Still, like, clubs can still do what they do. They can, coaches can still focus on tactics, but if coaches are looking for a way to also develop players, and let the players come and develop with us when they're not training with their club teams. Build off of that. Let us focus on the player aspect. The clubs can focus on their teams and the tactics that they're building. And from an ecosystem perspective, we're complementing it, not upsetting it. Like, if you try to go in and be that change maker that's going to upset the apple cart and tip it over, it's not going to go well. But if there's a way that you can come in and complement the system that's in place by helping it in the terms of developing the player, I think there's a model in there that can be successful. I read a book. It's one of my favorite books, called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. If you've never read it, I highly recommend anybody, especially someone who's in leadership positions, to do so. That's kind of how I look at what I do is I take extreme ownership of it, and try to make it successful. And so this is, at the national level, there's a lot of competing opinions, politics. It's hard to move that, but as a small group, we have the ability to be flexible to do it and own that future of developing the players.
Was it for you a decision of, you know, philosophical, structural, or operational, or was there a bit of a holistic approach to it?
I would say it was a philosophical decision. It's not something. I mean, you can build structure and operation without anything, but if you're building it around the wrong thing, it you can make something extremely good, but if it's not producing the results you want. And so it was really a philosophical thing in terms of, you know, how do we get better? Like, how do we develop players better in the country? I mean, that really was it. My focus is on the individual player development, and not necessarily going out there and building, competing, and winning teams. That I've been in that world, and I've seen the challenges, and with coaches that want to develop players, but they're being pushed to win. Um, it changes the dynamic of the team. It changes the dynamics of how you coach them. Uh, and so, to me, this was definitely a philosophical decision.
I mean, I wonder how many Messis and Ronaldos potentially are being left on the table in the US.
It's tough to say. They are, but we don't. We may not know that, right? Because it's like, a diamond that's in the ground. If you never dig it up, you never knew you had it to lose it. But I got to think that with a population our size, there are a lot of phenomenal players out there that are just going undiscovered.
And I think that like what you're building, the from a player aspect of it, is it's extremely enjoyable. It's fun. The players are getting a lot of touches on the ball, which they need for development. There's a lot of activity, especially the time that they're growing up with technology. Their mind's always going. So the smaller games are really good. The goalies get more shots off. They're more active. So I mean, it's something that I keep hearing coming up from on a coach's side, of being incorporated in their program. What's the feedback that you're getting from the parents and the kids?
They're really liking it. You know, we've got a few areas that we've got, I would call them pilot programs, that where we've been running some camps and some programming, and you can definitely see the kids starting to get better, starting to develop. Every kid has a ball at their foot. We're working both feet. Um, working with them on, what's the proper way of receiving a pass? How do we play a pass? And so far the feedback has been extremely good. And the more people start seeing what we're doing, and not only do they see the kids developing, but they're doing it in a fun environment, they're enjoying themselves. We are starting to get, more traction, which is positive, because I think there's an appetite out there for better development. I mentioned about educating the parents. Parents are far more educated today than they were when I was a kid, and parents are starting to see that it's not just the winning that matters. A lot of parents were former soccer players themselves. They've come through the system. How do we, like, how do I find the right opportunities for my kid to get better? Because it is still a very costly endeavor throughout their entire youth career. And so a lot of parents are looking for these opportunities. How does my kid develop better? And so they're paying like personal trainers, going to these additional programs, trying to just get that edge. How do I get my kid that edge to be in that 5 to 6%?
100%. What was the first non-negotiable principle you committed to when building United Soccer Camps?
No teams. Like we'll have teams. We'll do some in-house stuff where we'll apply what we're learning to matches. And I think matches are a great way of seeing how kids are taking what they're developing and applying it. But no teams, and the focus is player development only. Like that's it.
Got it. I mean, so dialed in, development only.
Yep. I'll leave the teams to the clubs. We will help you and complement you and give additional opportunities for your players to develop as individuals, which will ultimately lead to better club success. But when kids only have a couple of training sessions a week for, maybe 20 weeks out of a year, there's very little that coaches can really do on that individual and work with individual players. So that's the aspect that I really find missing. And so that's what we're trying to, complement and provide.
What has the feedback from the parents have been? What have you been hearing?
The parents that I've talked to love it. We've got a lot of repeat people coming back. So, to me, when I see, kids coming back to sessions and signing up for additional stuff, and, training and development, to me, that's showing that you're making an impact. As more and more people become aware and they start seeing and understanding what we're doing, how we're different in the marketplace, I honestly think that we're going to see the big growth in terms of the number of players coming in, but also the areas in the country that we're working in.
So diving into measurement and KPIs, you've led large-scale transformation using OKR, KPIs, and executive dashboards. If we applied that same rigor to youth player development, what 5 measurable variables would you track annually from U8 through U16?
So I would say that, we need to take a look at how those players develop as individuals. First, when they're U8, how are they on a ball? How are their individual skills? How are they at using both feet, encouraging both feet? I've known players that have done a entire training session for a week just with their weak foot, and because they wanted to get better at their weak foot. So to me, being able to look and say, here's what a U8 player needs in terms of their individual skill set, being able to work and move with the ball, juggling, um, you know, passing and receiving, and then being able to say, this is your baseline. Here's how you're tracking and measuring towards it. And again, soccer is a very subjective sport. It's a game of opinions, but if we have the baseline metrics right around what they can do with weak versus strong foot, you can help players differentiate between it, and then that expands as you go into U10, U12, all the way up through U16. And so to me, having that feedback, having that conversation, having the conversation with the parent and saying, here's how your player is measuring on these different attributes. Here's what they need to work on. The top players, the players that are really invested, are the ones that are going to go outside the training sessions to get better. If you're only touching a ball in your training session during matches, you're not going to improve. You may be a great athlete, but you're not going to improve as a soccer player. Like anything you're going to get into, it doesn't matter if you're going to be a pianist. If you're going to be the best pianist in the world, you need to spend time outside of your formal training sessions to work and play the piano. So anybody who's going to go into any type of profession, the more you work on it individually, the better you are going to be. Soccer's no different. And so when you get that feedback and you see where you're not as strong, those players, the ones that really want it, they're going to separate themselves out because they're going to go home and work on those things and come back. And you'll see that in training. You can tell the kids who work hard outside of training and the kids that don't touch a ball between training sessions. And so having that focus to me is critical, and having the measurements to to show and tell parents is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that extra training outside of practice boosts the quality of that player on field as well as their confidence. Um, you could just see it, as you mentioned, night and day. Um, how would you differentiate between measuring technical growth and tactical awareness?
So technical to me is, the player's individual ability. The tactical stuff is how they work and work as a team. Um, Tactics are something that coaches will teach around, trying to win matches, set plays, etc. If you've watched Arsenal this season, Mikel Arteta has done a phenomenal job him and his stuff with not only their defending of corner kicks, but their scoring off of corner kicks. And that's a tactical thing that they teach, right? Players should know how to be able to get up in the air and head a ball. They should know how to place a ball, specifically within a box coming from the corner. That's the technical aspect, right? Um, and so to me, our focus really is on the technical with a little bit on the tactical. And I say that because we want the individual player to develop. We want them to learn those 1v1 skills, both attacking and defending as an attacking player and defending player. But then when we start getting into the tactical side, when, we look at 3v3 situations, because in a 3v3 situation, you're really starting to understand how is it I move into space without the ball to create space for my other player that doesn't have the ball, so my player with the ball can move it. And then how am I getting into space so that when that player receives it, I'm in a position now to receive the ball. And so you can start passing and moving. And so those small confined games really help players in terms of, speed to play, movement off the ball, passing accuracy, moving after you've passed it. And really individual skills, 1v1s, 3v3s, they're all just moments in a match. So when you look at a full size soccer match, very rarely do you have the 11 guys aside together. It's usually a set piece or a corner kick that you get them all. It's always individual skill, 1v1s, 3v3s. It's all small sided stuff within a match when you really start breaking it down. And so by us focusing on those areas, we start building the base skills that when they go to their teams and their coaches now teaching team tactics, um, they have a better understanding of the technical aspect so they can then apply it to the tactical. And so that's how I would differentiate between the two.
Got it. Do you think development organizations should publish performance dashboards the way companies report financial performance?
Yes. We should have a standard. We should have, and there's countries that do this. We should have a standard that says, here's what players should know, age to age, right? We don't have that. Everything is very, subjective. It's the coaches or club's opinion. Here's what we need to do. But a lot of times, because they're building tactics, kids are learning passing patterns. But they're not learning in a training session, all right, this is the pattern I need to do to build a ball up out of the back. But they're not learning to fully think around, situational awareness to start. And this is something that like I learned from Todd. You can teach a passing pattern, but what happens in the match when the guy you're supposed to pass the ball to is marked or he's not there? What do I do now? All I know is I receive the ball, I play the ball. They're not thinking in the like the full context of the game around, how do I make decisions with the ball? Right? It's just reflex memory. And so being able to have that cognitive ability to read the game, understand the game, and start playing chess versus checkers and start thinking two or three moves ahead. Those are the types of things. How do I sit on a field and I see the triangles within the field? And when you're a player and you get to that level and you start looking at that, it's a totally different dimension outside of just like I'm told I play here, but look in a match, that's not always going to be open. And so how do we give these kids the cognitive ability to think for themselves on a field? And I've seen so many joystick coaches on the side of a match. They think they're playing a FIFA game. It's like, let the kids play. Coach them on the side when they come off, tell them what they need to do. But those coaches are so into winning, they're just directing everything, hoping that if they yell loud enough, the kids will do what they say and they'll score goals.
Yeah. That's and that impacts the player. The coach's philosophy impacts the player immensely. From style of communication, tone of voice, information being shared. Um, Growing up, I really appreciated that type of coaching style that you'd shared. Um, but it was also good hearing some positive affirmations as well on the side too from the coaches and from the parents as well. So I think positive is always good. Positive reinforcement, positive affirmation is always good.
When I take a player off the field and he comes on the sideline, my first question to them is, do you remember the situation and what did you see? Because I want to understand from the player, like, and in their first person view, what were they seeing? And then once I hear them, I'm like, all right, here's what I saw from third person. Could you have done this? Was this an opportunity? If you had turned your head and looked, could you have seen your teammate? Okay, let's work on those things. And so my coaching style is very different from a lot. I think where I coach the kids when they come off on the sideline. I give them pointers. I give a couple of points at halftime. I don't try to give them a whole prescription because it, two things at most. They're going to forget the third and anything else. And a lot of times they will only remember the last two things you said. They'll forget the first, which probably was your most important. So, keep your feedback to a minimum to the team. Your job as a coach is in your training sessions on the development. The game is just how they're applying what you're coaching. And so I try not to, be that joystick coach yelling and screaming. A lot of times, you'll hear me on the sideline be like, "Hey, could you have done that in two passes? Or could you have used your outside foot better?" Like that's the feedback I'll get from the sideline. I'm not yelling at players to go and run and do something, but I'm a different style coach, maybe.
Yeah. What would you say, like, how rewarding is it for you to see a program that you create being executed by the players?
I think it's great. I know there was a time I was coaching. I forget, it was a U13, U14 team, and it was a very, very good team, but it was a town team. And so we had a variety of players from, some really talented kids to some kids that weren't that talented. And, there was a kid that on the team, probably one of the lesser talented kids, right in front of the bench. He did a move we'd been working on and he didn't think about it. He got the ball, the pressure came on him. He just executed the move and got by him. And I was like, that is the greatest thing in the world to see because he just instinctively did it. And the whole bench was like, oh my God, that's so awesome. And so when I see kids starting to apply the stuff that we're training and do on a field, like I'm very happy for them. And, at the end of the day, if I've done my job well as a coach, the training will lead to success. It may not lead to success at the younger age groups. And I learned this, when my older son was playing with Tosh. It, Tosh had a style of play that he was working with the players on. It wasn't about going out and winning. And so, he would be losing at U10, but by the time those kids got to U14, U15, those kids, because they stuck with the program, they became much better players and they were just dominating everybody. But at U10, when they're still learning, Tosh wasn't out there to go and win the games. He could have if he wanted to, but he was there to teach the kids the right way to play, not necessarily win. It was a long-term thing for him. And so that was something that I learned, and that kind of influenced my help as a coach.
Yeah. I think some memories that are coming back too is I think it's always important too for the player, for the group of players growing up, the longer they can stick together, the better the chemistry of the team gets, as well as the coach, if they could stick with that age group as they continue to grow up. Um, because I just remember playing with the same players for a few years, 5 plus, and the bond and chemistry, and we know where the player wants the ball, what's their strong foot, who plays where, how they play, what they can do. That can have a huge impact on the player's playing experience and growing up. Obviously, things happen, players get injured, coaches leave, players leave. But I think that experience is a really good experience for players growing up. That could be one of the best situations to grow up in.
It really is. I think, it builds great camaraderie within the team, but like you were mentioning, you get to know player style, you get to know where they want the ball. You just get to instinctively know I can play a ball here and my teammate's is going to get it. But anytime you change that, there's always disruption, right? In management, we call that the J curve. If you take a high performing team and you make a change, let's say somebody leaves or you have to move somebody someplace else and somebody new comes in, regardless of talent level, there's always going to be a drop off in productivity. And as a leader, as a coach, it's your job to manage, you know, let's limit the depth of the J and limit the trough. And so we want to, minimize that disruption. But I think there's a challenging part too that, because of the pay to play structure, you know, there's a lot of club hopping from parents. They go from club to club to club trying to find the right fit, the right coach. And so you're constantly having that churn and that change year after year. Whereas, you look at some of the academy systems in other countries, if you're good enough at a lower level club and you're brought up to a higher level club, it's done because you're a good player, and kids end up staying for a while, playing together and building that rapport with each other, because they're not trying to go from club to club to find the best thing. Based off of merit, those kids move as needed. Now, there's obviously, always change when a new player comes in and you move a player up. That's going to happen, and those coaches learn how to adjust for it. But again, the focus is on the individual player development, trying to get those players to become professionals, because that's the reward structure. Uh, get this player to be a professional, and we're going to be compensated. The more players that we get, the more it'll be.
Got it. At United Soccer Camps, are you having different age groups play with each other, or do you guys keep players within the same age group?
So we'll start off with kids within their age groups, right? Because we want to see how they perform, and that's usually that's the best way of doing it, right? Keeping them together. But then you always find the kids that are you know picking it up quickly. They're a little bit more advanced in an age group, so maybe we'll move them to the next age group up, or maybe there's a kid that's struggling. We'll move them to the age group down, and so it can be fungible based off of where that player is in their own development journey and where it's best suited for them to be successful. Um, you know, Players that have always played up, like it's always good for them because they're getting that challenge. But sometimes it's good for them to go back at their own age level and be the best player. I think a lot of times in the U.S., though, we keep those best players as the best players, and it stagnates their development because when you're the best on a team, there's nobody challenging you. Everybody else is trying to get where you are. So the kids who are always in the top need to go into environments that are challenging them, because when you find yourself middle of the pack and you're hungry and you want to get better, you're going to try to become the best player on that team because there's players better than you that are forcing you to become better. And so those players will continue to move forward. But if you've always just been the top player on a team and you never go anywhere else, it stagnates your potential because everyone's trying to get to where you are at. There's nobody challenging you. So I do think that, putting players, an age or two above at times for their development is a good thing.
100%. United Soccer Camps emphasizes individual skill, 1v1 mastery, and 3v3 environments from a development science and game model standpoint. Why are those formats structurally superior for accelerating technical growth?
Well, hey, I mentioned it a little bit earlier on the podcast. Each of those is an element in a soccer match, and so our focus on those areas is we want the kids to really increase their individual skills. How are you on a ball? How are you in the 1v1 situation, because that happens constantly within a match, both attacking and defending, right? So we want to teach both of those. And then the 3v3 situations, it's how do you start working in a triangle? How do you start working with your teammates to, press an attack? How do I defend in a 3v3 to stop an attack? But it's how do I move off a ball? Keeping my head on a swivel, because I need to know, constantly taking snapshots. Where are my teammates? Where is the space? Where are the defenders? If I receive the ball, what am I going to do with it? And really, the best players, when the ball is on the way to them, they already know what they're going to do with it. And so when you start getting players to just already know that, then the game starts changing for them. But a lot of players, it's okay, I've received the ball. Now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it. And so to me, that 3v3 situation, especially when you play it in a confined space, it starts getting players to it forces players to think, how do I move this ball quick? How do I move off the ball? And it increases their speed of play, it increases their game IQ. And so all of those things that we focus on is going to help that player become better when they go back to their club team and they start playing and working in their clubs.
If United Soccer Camp scales nationally, what is the institutional model? Privately controlled operator platform, franchise expansion, strategic club partnership, or institutional capital backed growth?
I would say it's going to be a combination of all of the above. Obviously, capital is going to be important for growth and expansion. we want to have, from a privately owner controlled perspective, as you mentioned, um, the methodology that we're going to provide, like there's a specific methodology around player development that we're aligning to. But we want, as I mentioned about the extreme ownership, uh, we want people, when people own something, they take much more care and pride in it. And so, there's this, kind of an unwritten, I don't know what it's called, you would call it a stigmata, but a lot of coaches hop around too. Like they don't stay for long. They're always constantly trying to move to maximize their earning potential. And so, coaches that all have and run and manage their own company always will do better because it's theirs and they want it to be successful. So from a franchise perspective, I think that's a model that we're exploring. But then strategic club partnerships, I think, are going to be key. As I mentioned before, we're not looking to have teams. We're not looking to try and compete against clubs. We want the kids to still play with their clubs. But where the clubs can't really dive into the player development aspect, and I think that's proven, um, let them coach their tactics, let them focus on leagues and tournaments. We'll work with you to develop players. It's additional opportunities outside the current club where players can develop further and then ultimately bring that success back into the club so that their teams can be successful. So I think it's a combination of all four of those things.
Would outside capital accelerate the mission or introduce pressure that compromises it?
Short answer, yes, but it would have to be the right investors. Right. I don't want people that are going to, look to maximize, charging parents to maximize, profit numbers. Even though we're for profit because the plan is to go to the franchise model, um, it, we don't want this to be a cost for the parents. Like we're not trying to maximize our revenue. We want to maximize the player development. And so, and then I go back to that altruistic vision again. I can't give this away for free because obviously, there's facility costs, there's insurance costs. Insurance is crazy expensive. There's coach costs. There's just a lot of costs involved with soccer. So that has to be covered, but we don't necessarily have to be taking out so much money from the top so that, we're charging parents a lot of money. I want this to be a cost effective thing so that anybody that wants this can come in and do it. And it's, it can't be free, but I want it to be as little as we can make it.
Understood. Thomas, coming towards then here, there's significant optimism around the 2026 World Cup driving participation growth in the United States. But participation alone does not equal structural reform. If 2026 concludes without measurable change in development incentives or pathway design, what does that signal about the system's capacity for reform?
I think change takes a long time. Certainly after the last World Cup, we really had to take a look at things. With this one coming in now, it's on our shores. I think people are really hoping that this is going to drive the next renaissance in soccer development. And so, when you take a look at the last World Cup that was held on shore here, it led to a big growth. Really like the MLS was started, and there's so many things that have happened because of that. So I would hope that we are going to get bigger fan base, increase the number of participation of players, get more players excited and interested in soccer. And so from that perspective, I think like the World Cup would be successful. Obviously I'd like to see our men's, make it out of the group stage. Ideally go far into the World Cup. I think it's premature to say, I'd like to see them win the World Cup. I think that'll be a very big uphill battle. Certainly advancing out of the group stage would be, minimum for me. For the men's team. But when it comes to, structural reform, how we're going to bring in a lot of revenue from the World Cup. How is that revenue going to be spent in terms of developing players, right? And it's not developing programs and creating new things. We're very good at creating different opportunities and way to get money back. But at the end of the day, to me, if we're going to be successful, and when I say successful, like our men's and women's hockey teams just did at the Olympics, if we're going to go and be the best team in the world, which I think we have the capacity and capability to do, how do we make the right change to do that? And I think that's going to take some time. But when you start seeing the indicators that money is being reinvested in player development directly, that to me will be like, hey, it's serious. As I mentioned before, Mac Rocker's already called out the pay-to-pay play system and how it's not helping the sport. So how do we change that? How do we change the incentives so that the parents aren't the customer?
What concrete structural indicator should we be looking for by 2027 to know progress is real?
I might be setting the bar high on this one, but if we just changed the compensation structure, obviously not solidarity payments for a national contract, but if we followed what England does with the elite player performance plan, they set standard fixed fees for any player that signs a domestic contract within England, and there's compensation that goes down to the teams that spend time developing that player. So if we instituted our own version of that, where player you know player locally here in Omaha signs with the union, the clubs that spend time developing that player get a portion of that contract, right? And that can lead into player development. Now you're starting to change the model to the club and the compensation from the professional contract as the customer, from the parent being the customer. And so if we know we can make money by, kids eventually signing professional contracts, I think the focus on player development will get better because the money comes from there. To me, like I said, the bar might be set high within a little over a year from now, but that to me would be the biggest indicator of change.
Absolutely. I think I want to just come back quickly to the World Cup. This is the first World Cup that I'm, really paying attention to, to the politics, what's going on around the world. And currently, you know, what's going on in Mexico. I mean, is Mexico still going to be hosting? And it's just very interesting. I mean, I didn't know all this was going to be happening. I mean, I couldn't predict anything, obviously, but Canada, US, and Mexico are hosting. I mean, what are your thoughts currently? What's going on in Mexico, and do you think Mexico can get it together before the World Cup?
I don't know. That's a very challenging, and I mean, I don't really get into the whole politics of it, but certainly when you have um, resorts being overrun by cartel violence, you can't be having people from around the world flying in for the World Cup. Um, I don't know what it looks like, but if Mexico cannot get their hands around the security of the situation, guarantee security during the World Cup, I don't think FIFA has any other choice but to pull it. I mean, as much as they don't want to, and as much as Mexico won't want them to do it, at the end of the day, you need to have the safety of the fans. And this is the first World Cup that FIFA themselves is running. It's not the host country. And so, the trial run for that was the Club World Cup last year here in the U.S. Now you've got the World Cup coming. FIFA can't afford to have, security concerns for the fans and the teams coming in. So if there can't be some guarantees by the Mexican government, I don't see how FIFA has a choice but to pull it. Where they go, I don't know, and smarter people than me will figure that out. But if you're going to have that kind of instability and risk, I just can't see FIFA saying we're still coming.
Yeah,
That's just that's my 2 cents on it for whatever it's worth.
it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we only have 4 months to go, so I don't know. It's going to be crazy, but we'll see.
Crazy. It's only 1 month away now. Feels like it's coming. It felt a long way off in the distance, and it's here now.
Yeah, it's
It'll be
4 months. 4 months, then we
Yeah.
get 2 months of it, and then we got to wait another 4 years. One KPI every serious youth club should publish annually.
Skill progression metrics.
One percentage at U12 meaningfully or misleading.
Misleading.
What are the biggest challenges with the U.S. soccer ecosystem?
Current incentivization model for youth coaches and clubs.
The age where tactical systems truly start to matter.
I'd say U14. That's where they really start getting to know tactical systems.
And lastly, one structural reform you would implement immediately.
Can I give you 2? Is that okay?
Yeah.
My first one is the change the compensation system so that when club contracts are signed domestically, the youth clubs that develop the players get compensation for it, so we can start changing that model. The other thing that I would do is we got to align all soccer to one standard. And what I mean by that is it, we've got multiple different, youth platforms, different leagues, different, organizations that are running competing things. It's confusing for parents. But then your National Federation of High Schools is not part of U.S. soccer. NCAA, NAI, like they're not part of U.S. soccer. And so, kids get into college and now they're completely outside of any, structured development system. And, incentivization for coaches, the coaches they're incentivized to win. No coach gets paid more because, half their team went to the MLS the following year. That they get that they're incentivized to build a winning program. And so like other countries where you have a full top-down pyramid where you've got your grassroots at the bottom and it bubbles up to the top, I'd like to see one aligned system within the U.S. where, based off of merit only, the best players rise to the top and compete at our highest level.
Amazing. Thomas, I appreciate the depth and institutional perspective you've brought to this conversation. For everyone listening, if you value decision grade conversations around governance, capital, and development infrastructure in global soccer, make sure to subscribe and follow on Soccer Nation. Until next time, let's keep growing the beautiful game.
Kareem, thank you.